Hey guys, when you think about investing, when you think about making money, when you think about building wealth, have you not wished that you would have a simple set of recipes on how to get there? So guess what? We have an awesome guest today on the show, Gordon Stein, and he literally wrote a book called the Cashflow Cookbook. If you want to hear about some of the recipes that he cooked up for all of us to get to wealth faster, then tune in to today's show. On the Ideal Investor Show, today we have a special guest, and when I first heard about him, I thought well, what does cooking have to do with what we do and our audience is interested in? But then I actually found out, no, it's not the normal, it's the Cashflow Cookbook. And so we welcome Gordon Stein to the Ideal Investor Show. Welcome, Gordon.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Axel.
Yeah, Gordon, Cashflow Cookbook, it's a really cool term. I mean, especially for anybody who says, wow, can I actually make a recipe to get my cash flow going, and how does that work? And I know, at least myself and most people that I know, like to eat good stuff, and cash flow is good stuff, right? So maybe before we go into the details on how that really works, tell us a little bit, Gordon, who you are, where you're coming from. I know you do speaking and presenting and all these kind of things. So let us get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Well, I spent about 35 years as a senior executive, sales, marketing, and operations in high-tech firms. But I've always been interested in wealth building and personal finance, and I really realized just how many people struggle with their wealth, frankly, at all income levels. And then I had a couple of ideas, and one thing led to another. I found some interesting ways of freeing up more cash flow. A couple of really simple ideas in terms of getting car washes for free and reducing home alarm monitoring costs. $50 a month wasn't going to change anything. But then I started building a list of these. I spent 2 years researching the best ideas, became a spreadsheet, started looking at the future value of all of these savings. Then it became a book and a newspaper column. I've got a Canadian edition and a US edition of Cashflow Cookbook. And both books can free up about $13,000 of monthly savings. So that's pretty exciting for investors of any kind.
Yeah, that's a substantial number, especially a lot of people on first glance would say, I don't even make 13,000 a month. How am I supposed to get 13,000 a month? Can you say a word about that?
Right. Yeah, I've not met anyone yet who saved the full $13,000. But when I originally started to write the book, it was going to be a novel. And then I realized there was so much math and so many examples that it just didn't fit. And under my breath one day, I said, it's more like a cookbook. And so that's what became the Cashflow Cookbook.
Right.
These are recipes, that cover everything from housing, transportation, food, household, lifestyle, financial. So those 6 areas. And the total monthly savings is about $13,000. But what would happen with an actual reader is they might flip through a few recipes, say, I'm already doing that. Or they might say, that doesn't apply to me. Then they'll come across one. And I would say a typical reader is probably going to get 5 or 10 of the ideas and say, wow, I'm not doing that. That's worth $200 a month. That's $300 a month. That one could be as much as $400 a month. And typically, when they read the book, if they're serious, they really apply it, they can free up about $1,000 or $2,000 a month. And I really recommend they want to, I call it savor the savings. A lot of cookbook puns in here, Axel, but savor the savings, meaning right away, let's apply that to your real estate investing or to your equity investing and really make that money start to grow and build.
Right, absolutely. And actually, this is a topic in that context that our little community, and I hope the audience out there is also wondering, while you are, which is what we're actually doing on our end with Ideal Wealth Grower, on this journey to build basically enough of passive income so you can reach what we call the time freedom point, where you have the freedom to decide, okay, do I want to continue spend my time on the things I do, or do I want to free up some time and I can afford it because I have this passive income? But while you're on that journey, obviously the question is, okay, until that number gets to a point where I can, for example, decide, okay, I only want to work half the hours, or I don't want to have 2 jobs anymore, I only do 1 job. There is cash flow already happening. Relatively, basically, that's what we always say. You don't want to really get into residential real estate investing if it's not cash flow positive from day one. Well, but cash flow positive can be $100, $200, $300 mainly. And what do you do with that, right? So that's actually also something where we have identified new ways, like, for example, tokenized real estate investing, as a way to actually use and park your cash flow and not just put it in a savings account with no significant returns. But what I'm interested in, because I understand that you are really helping people who want to, in a sense, change and improve their life, I would assume, financially. So maybe we can start a little bit talking about what do you find. I guess it's a little different if you look like for the last 2 years and then this year, some of the abrupt changes that we are experiencing right now. But what are you finding basically as what people have done or what people are getting themselves into that then, well, requires Gordon's help?
Yeah, I think it has been an unusual, 2 or 3 years now with COVID
Yeah.
and the war and all of these different things. But in generally, the state of people's personal finance is horrific. We've got 64% of Americans retiring with less than $10,000. These are really shocking statistics. Depending on whose numbers, we've got about 2/3 of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. So when you talk about getting to this financial freedom point, I absolutely live that way. If I don't have a speaking engagement, I'll grab a guitar off the wall whenever I feel like it. I'll get out for a kayak, I'll go for a bike, I'll spend time with my family. But most people are really chained to a job and they're not able to get out of that. And so you get into this thing of where do you start? And I think the first place to start, I call it broil a bill. Lots, again, more cooking puns, but this idea of start with a bill and look at ways to reduce it. So in Cashflow Cookbook, I lay out 60 financial recipes. And it might be you're going to take a look at your cell phone bill, or it might be car insurance. And there's some more sophisticated ones that can free up a shocking amount of cash. And that's a great place to start. Then right away, you lock it in. You use that freed up cash flow to buy some residential real estate or do some investing.
Yeah. And what's your thought about this richest man of Babylon method? Are you subscribing to that as one of the recipes? What are your thoughts about that?
Sorry, I missed that again. Say that again.
There is this book, The Richest Man of Babylon, and
Yes.
it, in a sense, the quickest, easiest way that I always describe it is the only big thing that the guy does different than most other people that you just described is just take 10%, and you can change the number, but take 10%
Yes.
of anything that comes and pay yourself first and then deal with the rest. Is that something that would fit into your recipes?
Yeah, that's a great book. I think everyone should read that book, Richest Man of Babylon. And so many personal finance books have really just been rewrites of that book. So George Clayton's book, that really is the classic. I'm with you on that. So I think the idea is right, and what he's saying is, give up some things, free up, save 10% of what you earn and find a way to invest it and multiply the money. And of course, that really is the essence of wealth. But when I talk to people hear the same thing over and over again, they say, I don't have 10% freed up. I don't want to do detailed budgeting, and I don't want to give up things that I love. So in essence, I would say Cashflow Cookbook, and what I'm talking about, it's kind of the book before all of those books. Let's go back now. How do you free up that 10%?
Right.
In fact, even better, can you do it without giving up things that you love? And the answer is a resounding yes. So when I wrote the book, I said, here's the criteria. It has to free up at least $25 a month, and it has to be as easy as the way you normally buy the thing, and minimal effort, minimal sacrifice, and no incremental risk. So everything in the book fits those criteria. And the idea is, I think most people can free up that 10% without sacrifice.
Right.
And that's where it sort of fits in, just in front of The Richest Man of Babylon, or Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's so many of these books out there. The Wealthy Barber's another one. How do you free it up? You do it by reducing your costs on all kinds of everyday expenses easily. That's the key.
Okay, so with that in mind, for the audience, how would you then describe budgeting?
How would I describe
budgeting?
Oh, budgeting.
You said people are kind of averse to having a budget and getting really detailed and, balancing and that kind of stuff. By the way, that just dates me, I know that nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big aspect that I also see sometimes with our clients where the very first thing that I try to reiterate, I guess, it's not that they never heard it, is you need to have a heightened state of awareness of your money, right? And so I'm kind of curious whether you call that budgeting or whatever word you address to that or attach to that. How do you go about that when some people, or you said the majority of people, say, well, I don't really want to get too much into the details?
Yeah. I think budgeting, it's an approach. I think it has a lot of flaws with it, monthly budgeting. First problem is that People hate it. And it gets even worse if you try and do it with a spouse or a partner. I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to enhance your marriage, I would say, don't say, let's sit down this weekend and do some detailed budgeting. Okay. That's not a marriage enhancer. And
Right.
here's the problem with this idea of monthly budgeting is you can set a monthly budget, you can track that budget, and you can track it month after month after month. There's no guarantee you're going to end up wealthy at the end of all of this budgeting. That's the first problem. Second problem is I think it doesn't change the mindset. Typically, what's going to happen is let's say you say, okay, I'm going to budget $650 a month for car payments. If you go to a car dealer and say, my budget's $650 a month, he'll probably put you in a Lamborghini on a 220-month loan. And that's not a great thing for your wealth. But you know what? You made your $650, so you made your budget, but you're not helping your wealth at all. So I think a better way to do that is a couple things. One is start actually tracking your wealth. If you want to lose weight, I would track your weight. If you want to increase your wealth, track your wealth. What you own minus what you owe. Very simple. Track it every month. I'll guarantee you that'll give a big headspace change, become much more mindful on your spending. The other trick, I think, is separate your banking into two checking accounts. One pays all of the monthly bills, gas bill, electricity bill, cell phone, all the different flavors of insurance. And the second one is kind of your discretionary one. So obviously you can reduce the costs in both of them, but I would start with those monthly bills. And in Cashflow Cookbook, I lay out how to go through and easily reduce all of these bills in a material way. So now as you do that, maybe you free up $500 a month or you free up $1,000 a month, get that money working for you, real estate investing, etc. Once you do that, you're going to start to track your wealth. You're going to see that wealth start to expand and grow. Now you can start looking at those discretionary expenses. And I'll show you how to reduce those as well. But the place to start is if I lower my electricity bill, I don't change my lifestyle not one bit. If I can reduce the cost of my car insurance by $200 a month, I'm still having my latte at Starbucks. So that's a way to get people going, I think, Axel.
Yeah, that's very profound. And I think there needs to be a certain amount of joy, not just in the end result to say, now I see that in that other account there is more money or stuff like that, but on that whole journey or on that whole effort, if for no other reason than to probably stay motivated to keep doing it, right? If it's a pain on every step you take, and people try to typically get away from that, So now, one of the aspects that I find in our approach, which is basically when you have done your recipes and your treatment and so forth, and people now have actually cash flow and we're happy to help them, how much of kind of like an accountability partner or helping hand, I don't know exactly what you call your role, but how much of that do you think is necessary and how much of that do you actually provide?
Well, I can do individual consulting on it. I think, frankly, most people can get a copy of Cashflow Cookbook. It's literally written like recipes. So, here's the area we're going to do some saving. Is this of interest to you? Here's the ingredients, which are really the steps and ways to go after it. And then I even have a yield table in there, just like any other recipe. It produces 48 brownies or whatever. In this case, it'll say, hey, for a hearty serving, so picture a family, they've got 3 teenagers, a cottage, a home, etc. Here's the kind of numbers, and here's a place to work out what it would do for you. And then we look at a light recipe or a light serving, single person made with an apartment. So it's all laid out. You can follow along with that. And then on my website, on Cashflow Cookbook, there's an ingredients section. So for each of the sections in the book, you can go to the ingredients section and look at actual providers who can help with some of these things. So car insurance comparison engines is one example. Places to look for college scholarships to reduce your cost of higher education for your children. So there's always a way of doing it. And in some cases, there's providers who can help.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Thank you for that summary. So how, in your experience, do people get motivated to actually get into cooking of this kind?
Well, I think they start with a bill. I think in the book's actually written in 2 parts. So in the first part of the book, Axel, we're actually looking over the shoulder of this couple. I call them Eric and Keisha. They're kind of a compound view of lots of different people that I've met. And so they make these financial discoveries. They figure out ways to reduce their costs, minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. And we see their costs reducing as they go. And then we watch as they free up $1.5 million toward their retirement. So when you see that actually happening, that's pretty motivating. And then at the end of that point, they've already freed up $1.5 million. Then the reader gets kicked over to the second part, which is all the actual recipes.
Okay.
So 10 ways to reduce, costs on housing and all of these different categories.
And when you say free up $1.5 million, can you specify that a little bit more, what that means?
Yeah. So with each individual, everyone has a different time horizon.
Right.
So somebody might be 40 years old, and people typically will say, okay, you've got a 25-year horizon to retirement. I actually think the horizon is much longer because the day you retire, or let's say for argument's sake at age 65, you don't withdraw all your money and the whole financial picture is over. Your money's going to stay in there. And if you've made it to 40 years old, your odds are pretty good you're going to live to 90 or so, life expectancy these days. So you do have a longer horizon. If you're a younger person, you probably have a smaller spend, and therefore there's less savings to be had monthly. If you're 40 years old, you're at peak spending years, household formation, mortgages, all of these things. So you probably have a greater opportunity to save and reduce that monthly spend. But if you go all the way to somebody who's maybe 65 or 70, they'll use Cashflow Cookbook to lower their burn rate and preserve their cash out for a longer period of time. So the concepts are applicable to everyone. In the book, I use 7% as a growth rate on the investment. And a lot of people say, I only get 0.5% at my bank. Well, the place to invest is not your bank.
No,
It's going to
absolutely.
be in real estate or equities, or you need some kind of a growth vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the reason why we use residential real estate for investing, because typically when you look at it, and that assumes that you really look at all components. Sometimes people just say, okay, well, how much cash flow is it, or how much appreciation does it really provide? But there is 5 or 6 different things that are all cumulative. And you would find you would probably not even do a deal if it's not at least making 15%, right? And if you
That's
say,
it.
okay, I don't want to do real estate, I want to do stock market, on average, if you have like 25 years to look at it, that is anywhere between 7 and 10%, depending on how much or how little risk you want to take. So there are plenty of places. Now, real quick, to clarify, that $1.5 million, is that just accumulated, let's say, over 25 years? How much did you actually kind of not spend on consumption kind of stuff? Is that the way to look at it?
Yeah. So you can convert back and forth. So as an example, 7%, 10 years, future value factor is 173. So if you took $1 a month, invested at 7% over 10 years, you have about $173.
Right.
And of course, if the number is $100, you'd have 17,300. So over 40 years, 7%, that future value factor is 2,641. So you can start to see it makes a really big difference. $100 a month over a 40-year span is $250,000.
Yeah,
So it
so it's
becomes
basically
really
compounding, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I just like to clarify because it sometimes might be surprising when you say, well, you put $1 million, or that couple put $1.5 million aside, but that's because they didn't just let it sit there at 0.5% or something like that. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's very good. Now, we started the conversation, Gordon, when you said, sometimes when you did your research, you were quite shocked to see how little there really is for a lot of people in retirement. If I were like kind of cheeky, I would say, what about all this great information we hear in all the media and from the government about these fabulous 401k plans? Aren't we all going to be rich and having all those and not really have to worry when the golden years start?
Well, I mean, I think a 401k plan and a matching 401k plan is even better. And there's nothing wrong with it. You can certainly accumulate some wealth in there. I think people are pretty surprised, those who don't have a pension, just how much you need to be able to retire comfortably. If you think about having $1 million, let's say in a 401k, well, the $1 million, if you draw down 4%, which is the traditional notion, that's $40,000 a year. And that can often be a long way down from what people make, but it's even worse than that because that still has to be taxed. So if you've got $1 million, by the time you're done paying tax on it, maybe you have $750,000, and on that you can only draw down 4%. So now you're into maybe $33,000 a year. And for someone who's maybe been earning a household income of $150,000, $200,000 a year, that's a long way down. So most people don't have enough money in their 401k to give them a comfortable retirement. They need another engine.
Right, absolutely. I'm totally with you. I'm actually advising people to really, really seriously consider if it makes any sense to keep putting money in there. But I want to also mention why. And I'm really curious what you say about it. If I understand the Cashflow Cookbook and its kind of philosophy behind it correctly, you're building your wealth to this point, and you said 65. Some people might pick a different age at which they say,
Yeah.
okay, so now I decide I want to basically start drawing and not necessarily building anymore. But this whole thing, why I'm pretty allergic against traditional retirement plans, is this notion that somehow you would have significantly less money or need significantly less money when you reach 65, 63, 67, whatever your date or your age is. And therefore, your tax would be lower, right? Because if you really think about it for the audience, you're basically being told you don't have to pay taxes on this money that you're making right now. You pay it, like you just said, Gordon, when you start drawing from it. And the assumption is your tax rate will be lower. So I'm curious, what does Gordon Stein say about that idea?
Well, there's a few possibilities. One is it may not be lower. So there's possibility you may, have some side things on the go. You may have, dividend income, interest income, etc. So the taxes could still be higher. The other thing that people often say is, well, you'll spend less, in retirement than you do when you're working. That's not always right either. As you get older, one of the big costs can be healthcare costs. So that can become significant. And, we don't know how we're all going to end up, but you might need round the clock nursing care. And that can be very, very substantial. So I think you need a few different engines. I think Social Security is a great start, assuming you've got a good work history. Second engine, if you had a company matching 401k, that can be helpful as well. I still think you need some kind of passive income outside of those things coming in, whether it's, rental income or dividend income, interest income, something to bolster that. In a perfect world, everyone would have a really robust pension, but those are rapidly disappearing.
I'm totally with you. I mean, unless you're in the police or fire department or something like that, or government job. But I agree with that for the most part. The one thing that I'm personally struggling with is if I were to say, okay, well, let's, for anybody who needs it, follow the cookbook and maybe not 13,000, but find a few $1,000s and then invest them in 20 years from now, you're getting to this point. My first thing would be to say, have you ever been on a vacation that was cheaper than living at home or being at home? Right. And I'm using this to say, well, if we actually really do all these enjoyable things that we couldn't do because we didn't have the time, in my view, it's pretty unlikely that that is going to be cheaper than your normal life when you went to work and basically stayed in somebody else's building and come home, then eat, go to sleep, and do it again. Right. That's the one thing. But then the other thing is, I'm assuming, like you said earlier, you're freeing up cash using the Cashflow Cookbook and then investing that, and you're getting outcome from your investment, whether it's just selling stocks or you're having dividends or you have interest income or you have real estate with passive income cash flow that way. So those income streams, in my view, the motivating part would be to say, I don't really want to have just 40,000 a year as kind of like the prescribed income is supposed to have, when at the same time everybody says that's the point in life where I have the time to do the things I really enjoy, kind of like a vacation, right? So I want to just make very clear for people to not just use the Cashflow Cookbook to reduce your expenses and increase your wealth over time, but also be aware that some of the messaging, like you said, Gordon, like shockingly low amounts of money that people have when they actually reach retirement, if they then also have it in a vehicle that actually really doesn't live up to the promise, unless you live kind of like an undesirable lifestyle, right? You did the cookbook, all the recipes, and then you're suddenly supposed to not allow yourself to actually enjoy what you cooked.
Right. That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
And people have to strike the balance. But I think the good news for people is, most people are grossly overpaying on all of these monthly expenses. So if they can reduce that down, and I'm quite with you, in a perfect world, what you want to do is take that and get that invested, because then, it'll continue to spell out, rental income or dividend income over time. And you can, go much, much farther than just taking that freed up cash flow, leave it sloshing around in your checking account. It's going to get spent by you, by your partner, by your children. Somebody will spend that money. So you want to get that money off the table and get that invested for your long term.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I mean, one of the things that I find is in this more and more digital world and digital marketing world, it's quite interesting how much companies are willing to spend on attracting us as a client or customer to them. And to me, I'm oftentimes reminded of times when my mom, for example, collected all these coupons out of the newspaper, right? Like a physical paper, newspaper. But just to give an example, I get an email basically unsolicited from Hulu where they said, hey, we have a great offer for you to come and test Hulu for 3 months for $1 a month, which is like a 90% or something like that off their normal rate, right? And I get stuff from Netflix and stuff from Apple TV. And when there were only like 3 TV channels, that stuff didn't really exist. I'm just saying this as an example. Now there is so much variety and they're all competing with each other that if you go kind of to this mindset of coupon clipping, to your point about how can I reduce expenses, you can have 3 months Hulu for $3, then you have 3 months Netflix for $5, then you have 3 months, and you could have basically these kind of premium things for almost nothing because they're offering or trying to spend a lot of money to get you, and then they're playing kind of like what we just discussed on the 401k. They're playing on if you signed up, you forget about it, you put it on an automatic payment plan, you clicked on, after 3 months it goes up to $15 a month, and then nobody looks at it anymore. And I'm hoping anybody who reads the cookbook would say, no, you need to kind of look every month what comes in there, and when it went from like $1 to $15, cancel it,
Yeah, I think, the whole idea, there's lots of ways you can save money if you're prepared to drive to 5 grocery stores and, clip coupons and take up credit cards and cancel them. Like there's all kinds of ideas, but I think the average person doesn't have the time or the patience for any of that. And the whole premise, when I researched all of these Cashflow Cookbook recipes, it's easy things, easy changes to make. I'll give you a couple of examples if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
So really interesting one actually came from personal experience. I knew the concept and it's been in the cookbook for a while, but prescription drugs. So I got prescribed a statin pill for cholesterol, probably the most common pill in America. And, when you get a prescription from your doctor, you're focused on getting it filled and getting your medication.
Right.
You don't think about the costs, but the costs are incredibly variable here in the U.S. as an example. So I went to the drugstore that was on the ground floor of my doctor's office, which is typically what people do. And the pills were $107 a month. Now, that's not a massive number, but it's something to consider if I'm going to be taking them for the rest of my life. So I just commented these seem a little pricey. And the pharmacist said, you can get our drug card, and that'll reduce the cost to $63 a month. So I went from 107 to 63. That's about $500 a year on these pills by asking about this drug card, which is $20 a year. So there's a no-brainer, really easy, and that's going to hold for the rest of my life. So I was quite pleased about it. I told my brother-in-law over dinner the story, and he said, no. He says, you want to go to one of the online prescription drug companies. He gave me the one he uses. So I looked up my pills, $13 a month, 107, 63, 13. And when something's dropping that quickly, it bears some more research. So I found a different firm that I've been getting the pills now for a couple of years, $7 a month delivered to my house. It can't be far off the postage. So this is a great example, minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. I did a blog post called How I Save 94% on My Prescription Drugs. And now there's a number of companies who do this kind of thing. You can see them in the ingredients section, Cashflow Cookbook. But there's a great example of freeing up $100. Now let's get that $100 of cash flow to work. There's some money I can free up towards, a residential real estate deal or whatever. And then I can really start to expand that money. Over 40 years, that $100 is over $250,000 invested at 7%. And that, there's just one little thing, prescription drugs. There's a great start. You can start to illustrate how big of a deal this is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're making the same point. Just when you open your eyes, you raise your level of awareness of to say, is this the one and only approach that I have in front of me? Especially if it looks like, well, I'm right here, to pause and say, well, before I pull that trigger, maybe take a second look, or like in your case, a third look, and find out that,
Right.
You don't have to go with the number one thing just because it's immediately in front of you and most convenient, So I think that's a great lesson across the board for pretty much anything somebody does. And then it goes into the details of, okay, so how for each one of those different things do I go about it? Wow, that's really cool, because I think that's a great takeaway for our audience to say, yeah, I get that. Now I get the cookbook and find out what are all the different details where I can actually apply myself.
Yeah, that sounds great. And then, people, I think the other thing is once they get started, it's like any habit, you shift from bad money habits. Now you start getting into good money habits, and you start to look at things a little bit differently. I'll give you one more interesting one is that people really don't see. It's quite stealthy. So everyone gets the idea if they give up their Starbucks, they could free up. Everybody gets that stuff. But, an interesting one is credit score. Most people don't know their credit score, and most credit reports actually have errors in them that are easily corrected, but most people don't know that either. But if your credit score is poor, you can pay as much as 70%, 70% more on your loan interest, car loan, home loans, HELOCs, etc. And you can pay 30 to 50% more on your car insurance and your house insurance. So there's a stealthy one that's worth taking a look. Most people have no idea, and they could spend their entire lives paying 40% too much in their loans and all of their insurances.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I always say this to our folks as well, because that part that you just mentioned, that's why I recommend for everybody to have something like Credit Karma or similar companies that actually offer that. But it's also kind of nasty because when you're working like with your help or your recipes to improve your score, and then you want to do an investment like with us, and I'm always saying, I'm hooking you up with our existing relationships, for example, for funding. But most of these organizations, especially now that the Fed has increased interest rates and all that kind of stuff, are very eager to find out, would this person, would Gordon, would Axel, would anybody qualify? And in this huge stack of forms, paper or online, there's one that looks super simple that says, you give me permission to pull your credit. Well, that sounds okay for the first go around, but if you are actually on a trajectory and you want to shop around a little bit and people start pulling your credit over and over and over and over again. So I always say, well, get your Credit Karma and send them the report that you can pull down for free, which is not a pull on your credit and doesn't change your score, and tell them, no, I'm not signing this. I give you what it is today. And if I decide to work with you, if I really going to take on your money, then I give you one-time permission to pull the actual report for real through your own system. That I have seen people that in parallel, two different clients, and one did and one didn't, and it lowered their score. I mean, it's not forever, but it lowered their score for up to 100 points for like 6 months or so until it kind of starts coming back up. And those are, I'm totally with you. Those are a few things that apply both on the investing side and on the consumption side. So that's great. Thank you for that example. So we've been talking about a little bit, but I have to ask you the two questions I asked everybody at the end. So the first one is, if you could meet anybody you want, past or present, who would it be and why?
That's an interesting one. I would go with Benjamin Franklin.
Okay.
If you read a little about him, just such a visionary, a polymath, and just so profound in so many different areas. I think it'd be fascinating. It'd be fascinating to meet him back in his time, and it'd be even more interesting if we could time travel him back to today or forward to today and get his thoughts on the world that we see around us.
I would want to get those thoughts, but I would also want to interview him on the intentions of people in his time, because I'm not so sure if a lot of the stuff that we hear, especially on the judicial system, where they claim that they know what the original intent of certain old laws or the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or those kind of things really were. And I know for a fact, I'm kind of interested in history, that these guys didn't write every single thing and every single thought down. So there's a lot of interpretation going on, and I'm not always so sure if that's really what they intended. Now, you kind of bridged that already, intentionally or unintentionally, but the second question is always, if you had a time machine, and Ben is out, Ben, you talked with him already. So, but if you had a time machine, you could go anywhere, where would you go and why?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So many interesting periods in history. Are you allowed to go forward as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I might want to go forward.
Okay.
It'd be, just fascinating to see when you think of all the situations that we face today, and when you look back, so many of these problems that were a huge issue of the day, there's always been novel solutions that have got us out of that, and no doubt sent us headlong into another set of issues. But I think it would be interesting to go forward 100 years and see how all the things that we're fussed with today ended up getting resolved.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. If I were to challenge you to say, okay, some of the biggest things that are kind of like en vogue right now, what do you think, if you think of some of the bigger ones, what will happen to them when you get there and look at it 100 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, the environment is a fascinating one, and more evidence suggesting that there really is global warming happening much quicker than we would have thought, and all kinds of climate change implications. So I think that would be a really big one.
Yeah.
A second one that's interesting, and I feel it's something that's about to have a big breakthrough, and that is around batteries,
Hmm.
because so many things, electrification and a lot of naysayers on electric cars, they're kind of borderline today. But if with new battery technology, if you could charge them in 20 minutes, and if the range was 600 miles, wow, then it becomes a real game changer. So that would be one.
Yeah, I'm
And
with you on
then,
that. Although I have to actually ask, and I know we're getting a little bit
yeah,
in overtime here, but I've never really quite understood why people, and I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but why people take one technology that they are very familiar with for 100 years, and then there is an alternative, and the requirements on the alternative are way higher. I give you a quick example on what you were just right. Like I have a 2018 BMW. And when I fill this up absolutely to the brim, it gets 330 miles. And not, I mean, it can get slightly more. And if I really push it really hard, then it gets obviously less, but about 330 miles. And I've seen so many people say, well, when battery electric cars get to 400, 500, 600 miles, then it's going to be interesting for me. Then I would have to say, I could never buy this car because it's not getting enough distance, right? So I'm curious if you have an answer to why is it that this new technology has to be 1.5 or 2 times better than what we've all been used to. Very few cars get more than 300 miles today.
yeah, no, I think that's right. I think people get very stuck in a paradigm
Mm.
and very resistant to change. I don't know if you've seen any of Joel Barker's work,
Yeah,
his
absolutely.
book.
And I think the last part, the latter part, is the real point here. The resistance to change is a certain willingness in general terms, whether you take cars and electric and batteries or whatever, or other topics, is to say, who gives me an argument that I can roll with without knowing a whole lot about it that makes credible why I'm hesitant, right? So if somebody
Right.
comes and says we have range anxiety, and Tesla comes out and says, okay, all our cars get 300 miles. If you, for any model, you can get one 300 plus. You have really no argument with range anxiety, but somebody planted that as a credible excuse and everybody runs with it until it's 600 or some, I've read even 1,000 miles, right? So yeah, I'm with you like on cars. I'm also, and I guess we have to close here a little bit, but I'm curious how the power distribution is going to look like in 100 years versus what we're used to right now. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very different.
Well, so many things, and you think back over time, all of these paradigm shifts, things that we were terrified of, and then something comes in, an answer comes in from a very different angle than you were even anticipating. Or an interesting question I see all the time in business is you get a diverse team, and someone will say, but why even do that?
Mhm.
You'd be fussing about a problem, and do we do it this way or do it that way? And someone will come in from a very different angle and say, well, okay, why even do that step?
Yeah,
And your initial
yeah.
reaction, what do you mean? You've got to have the do. But again, the power of diversity of thought, somebody will say, hey, here's a completely different idea.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Elon Musk, right? Where he says first principle is no part is the best part, or no
Right.
procedure and know this and come down to the simplest physical denominator. I know that that doesn't work for everything, but if people were to adopt that as kind of like, let us have that at least as one or a couple of times in the process to check, is there a simpler way? Or like you just said it perfectly, why even do it in the first place? All right, cool.
Well, you see that, if you think about call centers, everyone's fussed about how long you have to wait and you can't get to a human. I think that paradigm is going to shift. Let's get Siri or Alexa doing it. You can see them getting better and better every year. Why have call center agents? What happens when those two things get to the point where they can do as good or a better job? Fabulous. Let's free up those people to do something else and get our answers faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I mean, unless they can actually fulfill that crazy thought of making it so it works in the first place, right? Then you don't need them at all. All right, Gordon. Well, as we come to the end here, how can people get their hands on the cookbook and maybe ask you questions if they have any?
Sure. Yeah, great. So the book Cashflow Cookbook is available. There's a Canadian and a US edition, both available on Amazon and worldwide. They can also go to my website, cashflowcookbook.com. I've got some blog posts up there, ingredients and other ideas. You can subscribe and get new blog posts as I write them. And I've been busy finally getting out the US edition, so I haven't done any blog posts in a while, but they're about to resume. And you can figure out how to reach me if you go to cashflowcookbook.com as well. Happy to answer any inquiries. I try to answer as many emails as I can. and love to connect with people and help them with their finances.
Yeah, thank you. And I can second that. I looked for my own research to prepare for our conversation at the website. And I really want to say you have a really, really cool website, especially for a topic like cash flow and finance and stuff. That's really cool. So I encourage everybody listening to take a look at it. We're going to put all the links and stuff in the show notes so people have an easy time finding it. So last word of wisdom, Gordon, before we close.
Well, I will second your vote on residential real estate. I think once you get that money freed up, I think that's a great place to invest and grow over time. It's kind of bricks and mortar, and housing is an ongoing need for people. So I like what you're doing with your company as well.
Yeah, well, we are helping them. First, you help them to get out of debt, and then I help him to use their cash flow for something.
That's terrific. Thank you so much,
All
Axel.
right, thanks for being on the show, and maybe we can do it again sometime soon.
I'd love that.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.